Now what the hell do you think you're doing with that tin star, boy?
Watch that boy shit, redneck. You talking to the sheriff of Rock Ridge.
There are movies that make you laugh, and then there are movies that change the way you think about laughter itself. Blazing Saddles is the second kind. Since its release in 1974, it has been picked apart by critics, celebrated by comedians, and quoted endlessly at dinner tables and film school lectures alike. Most people who love the film think they understand it. They remember the campfire scene, the breaking of the fourth wall, the audacity of its racial satire, and the sheer nerve it took to make a movie that bold during that particular era in Hollywood. But here's the thing about Blazing Saddles that almost nobody talks about, and that Gene Wilder himself eventually confirmed. The secret heart of that film was never in the loudest moments. It was in the quietest ones. Gene Wilder, the man who played the Waco Kid, was never supposed to be in this movie. And once he got there, he made a decision that most actors at the time would have considered professional suicide. In a film overflowing with noise, chaos, and wall-to-wall absurdity, Wilder chose stillness. He chose restraint. He chose to play his character as a real, broken, deeply human being rather than a cartoon cutout designed to deliver punchlines. That decision, which puzzled some people on set and concerned others, turned out to be the single most important creative choice in the entire production. And for decades, most fans never even realized it was a choice at all. They just felt its effect without being able to name it. This is the story of what Gene Wilder brought to Blazing Saddles that nobody wrote into the script, and why understanding it completely transforms how you watch the film. To understand what Gene Wilder contributed to Blazing Saddles, you first need to understand how close the film came to falling apart before it ever really began. The role of the Waco Kid, the washed-up gunslinger who befriends the new black sheriff in a deeply racist frontier town, had originally been cast with Gig Young, a respected Hollywood actor who had won an Academy Award for his performance in They Shoot Horses, Don't They? On paper, Young was a sensible choice. He had the weathered credibility the role seemed to demand, and he carried the kind of dignified screen presence that could have given the Waco Kid a very different kind of weight. But the first day of filming told a completely different story. Young arrived on set visibly unwell. He was trembling, sweating, struggling to deliver even basic lines. Some on set initially thought he might be running an unusual kind of method preparation. He was not. Young was experiencing severe alcohol withdrawal, a medical emergency that forced production to halt entirely by mid-morning. He was removed from set, and the film suddenly had no Waco Kid, no timeline for replacing him, and a director trying to hold together one of the most ambitious comedies anyone had attempted in years. Mel Brooks did not schedule meetings or start a formal search. He picked up the phone and called Gene Wilder. The two men had worked together on The Producers several years earlier, and Brooks trusted Wilder in the way that only comes from having survived a creative project together. What happened next has become one of the more remarkable stories in Hollywood production history. According to Brooks, Wilder did not ask to read the script. He did not ask about his salary or his billing or the size of his trailer. He said yes, and he was on a flight the next day. There's something almost absurd about that kind of trust, which is fitting given the movie he was flying toward. Wilder arrived jet-lagged, with almost no preparation and no rehearsal time. Most actors in that situation would have been cautious, deferential, tentative. Wilder walked on a set and immediately began inhabiting the Waco Kid as though he had been living inside the character for years. The question of why he was able to do that so quickly points directly to what made his performance so singular. He did not have to learn how to be the Waco Kid because he already understood intuitively and deeply what that man was made of. Here is where the story gets genuinely interesting and where most fans have missed something crucial. When Gene Wilder agreed to join the production, he came with a condition. Not a demand about money or credit, but a creative one. According to Mel Brooks in later interviews, Wilder made it clear from the beginning that he was not going to play the Waco Kid for laughs. In a film that was essentially constructed as a nonstop comedy machine, the man playing one of the two lead roles had decided, before shooting a single frame, that he was going to treat the material as if it were a drama. This was not an ego play. Wilder was not trying to rise above the material or position himself as the serious actor in a silly movie. It was something more thoughtful and more strategically intelligent than that. He understood, in a way that is difficult to articulate but immediately obvious once you see it, that comedy at its highest level does not come from performing funniness. It comes from performing truth. The funnier the situation around a character, the more effective that character becomes when they refuse to acknowledge how funny it all is. Wilder saw Blazing Saddles not as a collection of jokes waiting to be delivered, but as a film about a genuinely ruined man stumbling into something worth caring about again. He played that story straight. Everything else took care of itself. Watch the jailhouse scene with fresh eyes, and this becomes unmistakable. The Waco Kid is lying in a bunk, barely functional, dressed in rags, clearly somewhere he ended up rather than chose. When Sheriff Bart first encounters him and asks who he is, Wilder's delivery is not comic. It is exhausted. It is the delivery of a man who has told his own story so many times that he no longer finds it interesting or sad, just factual. The humor arrives not because Wilder is playing it for laughs, but because the gap between the character's former greatness and his present condition is so vast that it becomes funny through contrast alone. That is a much harder thing to do than it looks, and almost nobody else in that film could have pulled it off. One of the things that makes Blazing Saddles work as well as it does, even 50 years after its release, is its internal architecture. The film is not simply a string of gags. It is a system of contrasts, and those contrasts depend entirely on having at least one element that plays against the chaos. Without that element, the absurdity has nothing to push against. It just becomes noise. Gene Wilder was that element. Every scene that surrounds the Waco Kid with madness lands harder because he is not participating in the madness. When Harvey Korman is chewing scenery as Hedley Lamar, or when the townspeople of Rock Ridge reveal their profound and cheerful ignorance, or when the film starts breaking its own fourth wall and tumbling into a studio backlit, Wilder remains the same. Calm, present, slightly amused, and fundamentally sad. That consistency is not accidental. It is architectural. He was the load-bearing wall of a film that appeared, from the outside, to have no structure whatsoever. Mel Brooks understood this, which is part of why he later said that Wilder's contribution gave the film its backbone. But the specific mechanism by which Wilder achieved this is worth examining more closely. He used silence as a tool in ways that most comedic actors are trained not to. In comedy, silence is typically a danger zone. You fill the silence, or you lose the audience. Wilder did the opposite. He let pauses breathe. He allowed reactions to register slowly, as though the character was genuinely processing what he was seeing rather than waiting for his cue. Those pauses gave the audience time to feel the joke rather than just hear it. And that feeling is what makes a joke stay with you long after the movie is over. His famous line about the townspeople being simple farmers, people of the land, the common clay of the New West, before calmly appending the word morons, is the perfect crystallization of this technique. The pause before that final word is everything. It is not performed. It is not telegraphed. It lands like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward because of how calm the surface was before the drop. Without Wilder's stillness in the moment leading up to it, the line is just a good joke. With it, the line becomes iconic. Mel Brooks has been candid in various interviews over the years about the fact that what Gene Wilder did with the Waco Kid exceeded what was written on the page. The character as scripted was functional, a foil and ally for Sheriff Bart, a source of dry commentary on the absurdity around him. What Wilder added was an entire emotional history that the script never provided, but that the performance constantly implied. There's a sense, watching Wilder in this film, that the Waco Kid has a past that would fill its own movie. The trembling hands that signal his alcoholism are not played as a running gag. They are played as damage. The way he talks about his former reputation as the fastest gun in the West carries no nostalgia and no pride, only the flat recognition of a man describing someone he used to be. That is not a comedic choice. That is an acting choice of the highest order applied to comedic material, and the result is a character who is funny because he is real rather than real despite being funny. Brooks later acknowledged that Wilder brought an emotional intelligence to the role that transformed the entire production. That phrase, emotional intelligence, is worth sitting with. It describes the ability to recognize and work with the feelings beneath the surface of a scene rather than simply executing what is written on top of it. Wilder diagnosed the Waco Kid not as a comic type, but as a specific kind of man, one who had burned out spectacularly and retreated from a world that had disappointed him at the exact moment he was most capable of meeting it. That diagnosis shaped every line reading, every reaction, every moment of stillness. And once you understand that is what he was doing, the entire film changes in front of you. What Wilder did on camera was only part of his contribution. Off camera, he played an equally important but far less visible role in shaping what Blazing Saddles became. The production was not an easy one. The pressure of making a film that attacked racial hypocrisy with this much directness, while simultaneously fighting studio executives who wanted the edges sanded down, created an atmosphere of constant tension. Brooks was the visionary driving the project forward, but visions require calm people around them to keep the machinery running. By most accounts from people who were present during filming, Wilder was that calm. He did not involve himself in confrontations or politics. He did not draw attention to himself between takes. But he was consistently, quietly present for other performers, offering small adjustments of timing or tone in a manner that was more collaborative than directorial. For less experienced cast members, having someone of Wilder's caliber willing to share that kind of subtle guidance without making a performance of the generosity was genuinely steadying. There's also the matter of what he was thinking about during the downtime. Wilder spent portions of the production mulling over an idea that had been circling him for some time, a story about a descendant of the famous Dr. Frankenstein who wanted desperately to distance himself from his family's disturbing legacy. He shared the idea with Brooks during breaks in filming, not as a formal pitch, but as one collaborator talking to another about something that excited him. Brooks was initially too absorbed in the current chaos to pay it much attention, but Wilder wrote a draft anyway. When Brooks finally read it, his resistance